Welcome back to Access the Future, the monthly podcast and video series from the Access Control Executive Brief in Acre Security. I'm your host, Lee Odess. This is the place where we don't just report on the future, we define it. If you've been following along, in episode 1, I sat down with Kumar to explore the security landscape in 2025. What's shifting and what does tomorrow look like? We're looking at a shared vision. That conversation set the tone for the entire series with a high-level view of where we're heading. In episode 2, I spoke with Justin about the evolution of customers' demands and expectations, how they're changing. We've unpacked how buyers are pushing us to think differently, build differently, and serve differently. Today, in episode 3, we have a special guest where we turn our focus inward on talent and how it's changing the way our companies grow, innovate, and lead. And to do that special guest that we talked about is Steve Shine. He's the new chairman of Acre Security. He's led enterprise technology businesses through change, transformation, and opportunity, from Sybase and Actian to his pivotal role at Qognify. Now he's helping to shape Acre's future and, by extension, the future of our industry. In this episode, we're going to go deep into Steve's journey and what drew him to Acre, how the talent landscape in our industry is shifting, and what leaders can do to build tomorrow's workforce. And what you're going to hear is simple yet profound. And be sure to stay tuned because in our next episode, I'll be joined by Acre's new Chief Product Officer, Sarah, as we explore why security is becoming a platform, not a product. Platform was our word for 2025 and it's playing out. And it's going to be a good one. Let's get into the conversation around talent. So let's start at the beginning. You've had a remarkable career across enterprise software or physical security. It's actually exemplifies a lot of what we talk about on a regular basis. And before we get into exactly what you're talking about, thank you, or what you've done. Thank you for being here and doing this. And I'd love to give it a little bit of background of where you've come from and what is some of the things that you've seen throughout change, because you've clearly have seen this. And what's nice about it is in the video side, which you'll get into, I'm sure, you've actually seen this a lot, and it probably starting to see some things that look familiar across the access control industry. So if you don't mind, Steve, please introduce yourself, your background, and then I'll get into some follow-up questions.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. So
Yes.
Steve Shine, I am chairman of Acre, relatively new. So joined the Acre team in March of this year. Background, so prior to the ERP, I've a degree in physics. I live in London, but spend most of my time all around the world. And my first engagement was actually in the oil and gas industry. So I was on oil rigs in Africa and various different places, the North Sea and what have you. Then decided that what I wanted to do was to get into technology. I've always liked technology, always been a fan of technology. So I joined what is now called Accenture, and spent 5 or 6 years in sort of really complex, very bespoke solutions for mainly large customers. And what it did 2 things. One, it gave you a very in-depth understanding on necessity around understanding what a customer needs, because if you get it wrong, they're very disappointed in the end.
Sure.
And the other was it gave me an exposure to the software world, the packaged software world. And that's really where we then bridged into ERP, so the enterprise resource planning. And as you said, so I spent a number of years in the sort of high-end enterprise ERP space. Then I moved into enterprise data management and then on into physical security. What were the commonalities there? And this is going to be the same with Acre. It's all of those industries bring about transformation at one point or another. So way back when, and I'm not going to say when, it was a long time ago, but ERP was really transforming the industry. It used to be very siloed. You would have your departmental systems. You'd have a finance system, a manufacturing system, an HR system. And everybody loved that, and nobody ever spoke to each other. And then the transformation that came through there was business process re-engineering, and people said, but that's not how business works. Customer orders something, and you've got to be able to work it all the way through to delivery and make sure you can fulfill. And that was the transformation that I loved, because it was a balance of, you really, really, really had to understand what the customer wanted, and then it was quite complex. There's a lot of people change that goes along with shaking up the way that things are done. If you then look at the data industry, so again, another classic example of transformation. For years and years and years, the industry had its number one focus was around relational databases. Relational databases solved everything. And then all of a sudden, people started to say, well, that's all the structured data. What about all the unstructured data that's out there? What can we do with that? And you suddenly got an enormous transformation, which then led to the phrase at the time, pretty gross phrase, but big data, which if you fast forward that, has really led to, it was that sort of scale and variety of data that led to people writing some very, very clever software that enabled you to start to understand how to model and look for patterns in that data. And, fast forward that, it's actually the underpinnings of where we are with AI today. So again, huge transformation. And I've probably spent quite a bit of time in there for a number of companies, including Sybase and Actian. And then the transition out of the sort of core classic sort of ERP and data management and into physical security. And I'm just going to admit, I knew absolutely nothing about the physical security other than the cameras that I have at home, which makes me a tech geek. But again, exactly the same thing. If the company that I joined was Qognify, it was actually an amalgamation of Nice Systems, video products, and On SSI, which was a US-based video solution. So there are 5 different video solutions in there. But again, the video world, they're going through its transition. It had gone through what I think is the most simple of transitions from analog to digital. Sure. But then as you move to digital, the whole software opportunity becomes very exciting. But it causes ructions through the channels, through the end customer base, and that was, it's, so if you asked me along that journey up to today, what it was that drove me in all of those instances, it's change. Yeah. There's never a constant. And if you think it's going to be constant a year from now, you're already out of date. And I know it's an old adage, but it is very true.
Yeah, and I guess, so you talk about data side of this, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because we've been talking about how we're moving to an industry where it's actually a data industry just being applied to security in a lot of ways. If you think about what's, some of the movements that have happened going to cloud and the ability for automation to happen and the rest of it, those things sound a lot like what a lot of these industries that you talked about on that side. But so as you look at the industry, I mean, I can infer some things, but you tell me. But so as you've looked at those, and I can see how that would relate to the physical security or the physical access control. But why Acre? I guess like what brought you to being now the chairman of Acre? What was it about the opportunity, the moment? Like what was of interest? Is it that you saw some reflections of the past and the opportunity to do it again, or what was it?
So I think there's always an element of luck that plays into this. So sure. Just in terms of background, so I was CEO of Qognify, which was a sort of mid to enterprise video security system. That was acquired by Hexagon in April of 23. And it's quite a small ecosystem, the sort of physical security world. And so during that exit process, there was a brief conversation with Acre, and that was my first sort of real look into, okay, that's quite interesting what's been built. And I could already see the similarities in that you had great products, great customer bases, and time goes by. Then Triton actually reached out on another project they were working on, and I got talking to the lead partner there, who essentially said, have you really ever taken a good look at Acre? and they had just brought on a new CEO, Kumar Soka, and it sort of went from there. So I stepped in, met with Kumar. So first of all, you probably got it from before. I love the industry. I think it's going through change, and that makes you get up and you're challenged every single day, which is great. But then when I saw the team that had been built, this was just like, okay, this is great, because if you have to start from scratch, it takes you 2 years to build a team, and that's quite hard. And then you've got to make the change after that. I met Kumar and his team, very, very positive on that. And so it was just a case of, okay, if Kumar and I can find, the right chemistry and engagement where I can add value, then this will be fun along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's funny. We like to talk about the hardware and the technology, but again, a lot of this comes down to people. So the
hardware, technology, software, that all changes over time, but the sort of culture, which is more than one person, but the culture is really important, because, so long as you don't completely abandon it, that has life and it has longevity.
Yeah. So talk to me a bit about that, if you don't mind. So this episode, if you would, is about talent and the changes that are happening as we move into the future of our industry. But from your approach, from leading through transformation a handful of times, that, like you said, when it comes to people and culture, what is your approach? Like, what do you lead with, specifically around talent and culture?
Yeah. So, I think it's one of the most fundamental questions. And when I've been brought into a company, actually for the people, let me explain that. Before the people, I actually look at who do they want to be? Where is it that they are going to take the company? And if they don't know that, you very quickly want to get to a position where you understand that. You understand what its uniques are. You understand why it's different. You understand why it can win. And you effectively look at that, for want of another phrase, that vision, that sort of roadmap over the next 3 to 5 years. And then you sort of broadly walk back and say, with that end in mind, what is the organization that you would need in order to be successful? And then what you do is you say, and what's the people and the skills and the attitudes and the attributes of the people that are going to be most successful? Because it can be very, very different. There are certain people that will be A+ in a certain type of vision and execution plan, but not fit into another vision and execution plan. So I had the benefit, like you, of getting the briefing from Kumar of the vision that he'd set, and then being able to see his team. Those two big building blocks were a great starting point. And for me, when you ask, what is it that you're looking for? I say, well, it depends on where the journey you're going to go on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. So then, yeah, if you don't mind, break those things. I love the way you did it, because we talk about the access control, specifically, I'd argue physical security. There's major pockets where it's an incremental growth off the last 30 to 50 years. But when you talk about this type of transformation, it's a fundamental shift. So there's a need for a different type of talent, if you would, right? You're saying there's certain people that don't turn the corner. Doesn't mean they're not bad. They're just maybe not the right fit for what you're trying to do with the vision. What is, though, some of that talent, like that, the new talent that you would need that maybe the incumbent legacy side of our industry didn't have, that you need to have as you move forward in a more digital, data-oriented structure to that vision that, and if you want to tie it to the vision with Acre, please do, or just in general.
So a good question. I don't think that the incumbent industry is lacking talent. I absolutely don't. I've met a lot of really skilled people, but I don't put skills first. So if you said to me during a hiring, the number one thing is always the same for me, and it's attitude. Okay. What is the attitude that person brings to the company? And so I think there are there are loads of individuals in this industry that have absolutely terrific attitudes, and the way they think about engaging with the channel. And I think the channel is it's not unique, but it is a very strong difference from a lot of other software sectors where I've worked in enterprise, where you have a direct relationship with the end customer, the person who uses the software. So coming back to answer your question, when I look at it, first of all, you need a leader that can define purpose. If you think of it, it's again, I always start at the end point and work backwards. So if you have a leader that's been able to pull together a team that can build and articulate where they're going to be in 3 to 5 years, why they're going to be different, and why they're going to win, okay, then the attributes of that team that are best suited, in my opinion, are the ones who wear two hats. And I'm talking about the leadership team to begin with, because I think a lot of this stuff cascades down. They wear two hats. And in my previous operating roles, I was very, very open with the leadership team. Every time we're together, you wear two hats. You're going to be wearing your individual departmental responsibility hat, but you're also going to be wearing your leadership hat. And the leadership hat is because we define a plan that we all agree. We set those goals 3 to 5 years out, and we work an execution plan, okay? And we've got to understand that we won't get it right, okay? And we're going to be making some fine tuning or even some major moves along the way. And the attitude needs to be one of we're fine with making those mistakes, and what it doesn't become is a recrimination discussion. It becomes all right, let's put all the data on the table. What happened? How do we fix it? How do we move forward? What needs to change? In that, sometimes an individual wins, sometimes they lose in terms of where your emphasis may move. But if they've got their leadership hat on and their view is it's the right thing for the company, everything else starts to flow better. Everything starts to flow better, because then when they go out and they are executing their parts of the program, they know how it contributes to the bigger picture. They know the interdependencies. And I find that if the leadership team is happy to have that open and sometimes a little bit of friction in that dialogue, what it does is it provides for a much, much more genuinely collaborative team. That ethos, that style of leadership, those attributes, because most of those attributes are not skills. They are, do you have the attitude to be open-minded and to take the hits and to come back to the table and work the problem rather than point your finger? It are hugely successful, and they bleed down through the organization. And if every one of the leadership can articulate the vision and the purpose of the company and why we're different and why we win, and they can interpret that in terms of, well, what does that mean for development? What does that mean for the sales organization? What does that mean for marketing? You get a more coherent business. And it sounds like general strategy, but actually it is in answer to your question about what do you look for in terms of the core attributes, capabilities, characteristics, and skills.
Yeah, no, so the words, a couple things, because sometimes the unsaid is also the said in this, and I've noticed the term leadership makes a lot of sense. You're not saying management also, which is, no. I do believe in times of change, what you're looking for. It's like the wartime versus peacetime analogy that I think it was Peter Thiel or somebody that said at that point, maybe it was Injuries and Horowitz, but you're mentioning leadership through the change versus managing through predictable markets, which again, I think in some respects, our industry has been somewhat predictable in a lot of ways. Yeah, there's been challenges and whatever, but realistically, we haven't, the fundamental value, it was pretty easy in my opinion, was delivering safety and security. Now it's hard, but that's what we had to do. Now we have somewhat more of an unpredictable new, and you're talking about leadership, and it's the attitude behind the ability to set clear vision,
the skills, and leadership as the other attributes, that sort of open-minded, positive attitude, flexibility, those types of things.
Yeah, and what I also like that it very clear to me is there's an aspect of understanding communication, of how to communicate to people and how to deliver a clear vision and the why when you started talking about those. So those are the things that popped out to me on what you said was leadership, this attitude, the ability to ebb and flow, even in bad times, right? Good and bad, get clear vision and why that's there, and then be able to communicate that properly so that you can crisply align the organization to be able to execute.
And you always underestimate how many times you need to repeat the same thing, because it takes time for people. They hear the words, it makes sense, they go on to their day job and they forget it. So you need to do it again, and then you need to do it again, and you need to drop examples in there. So when you have that great execution of a piece of the vision at a customer, tell the rest of the organization about it. This is what represents success for us going forwards. And you've got to do that again and again and again. The communication side of it is probably the biggest struggle when you think about it, because you and your leadership team are going, well, we've come up with this, fabulous vision and we've written it all down. Why doesn't the rest of the organization do it? Doesn't work that way. You actually have to get out there, and you just need to keep on working through the program.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I agree with you. Our industry has a lot of talent. Now there's always the need to level up with especially as things change, but we luckily have a marketplace of institutional knowledge that's there. Talk to me a little bit about, though, as you saw the changes going on from your past, where you have younger professionals come into it. And there is a belief that our industry needs to attract more talent. I think I hear in talking to everybody, we're involved heavily with FAST, which is the Foundation for Advancement of Security Technicians. It's about getting young. We have RISE within the association, which is the young professionals group on that end. But as you saw the leveling up, I'm guessing, or tell me, did you see leveling up happen? If you did, what were some of the underpinnings of how that was, that became part of what had to happen? And then this new group of bringing them in, like younger professionals, especially today, they got different purposes. I'm sure they did then too, different flexibilities that are needed, autonomy, whatever it might be. How do you attract more of those? How does that change the way that an industry leadership team communicates and works with them? Like what are your views in total around new talent coming in and the need to level up?
So there's a couple of things in there I'll challenge if you
please.
Don't.
Yeah, this is, I'd rather than just
young and old don't care.
Doesn't matter.
You go back to the core things that drive that individual. There are many people that are really good people that if you put them inside an organization that has decided it is going to transform itself and it wants to be an agent of change in the industry, and they do not like it, and they cannot work within that because there is ambiguity, there is a lot of uncertainty, and these are things that some people's DNA, their makeup just rejects, and it can backfire on you. And yes, there is an element of more senior people might have had more experience, and so they've learned that they've got the bruises and they can deal with it. And yes, there is an element of that. But I meet lots of people that are 3-4 years into their careers, and they've got a fabulous attitude. The more change you throw at them, so long as that, we go back to that, and it's going to be a very boring repetition, but that leadership of, if people understand that they're joining a company that has purpose, has an objective, and it's meaningful in some way, and that they relate to, okay, that really helps. Because otherwise, why do you go to work? I don't care if the person's 22 or 52. You need to have that purpose. Then I think it boils down to, do I like having a variety of ages inside a company? Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just ages. The very out of term phrase at the moment of diversity, it shouldn't be out of term. I think it's fabulous. I think the more diversity you bring in there, the more people that you can get with different views and different perspectives in a room, the output is almost always better if the leadership style encourages that. And that's a very big if, and it boils down to that open-mindedness. You've got to be able to let people speak. So a big fan of that. There are, however, some changes that I've gone through. The biggest one that I know you hinted at there was if you think about the way office or work from home goes. Again, I have a very simple view on that. Depends what the outcome is. So cascading down the vision, the execution plan, there are certain roles that honestly don't need to be in the office ever. And there are other roles that probably do need to be in the office. I think as an underlying benefit, getting people together is a good thing, but I'm not a fan of mandating that, you've got to be in the office X days a week, or certainly not a fan nowadays of saying, you have to come back to the office altogether. However, it does put more pressure on management. And I'm saying management now as opposed to leadership, because
I noticed.
there are some challenges. Those challenges being not everybody is self-structured in their productivity without there being a framework around them. And when you're in an office, there is framework, regular meetings, have you done X and so on. And that's harder to do if everybody is working from home. And so the management philosophies do need to be tweaked. So how do you make sure that people have a clear understanding of what they're responsible for, and that you can develop a level of accountability in those individuals? And how do you make sure that the sort of cross-departmental interactions that are hugely valuable? Product management is probably the very best example of that. So Sarah, who I know you're going to be speaking to, her role in my mind, and think of this, she's got to bring people like yourself. She's got to bring the sales organization. She's got to bring the integrators. She's got to bring R&D together. And she's got to somehow formulate, this is where the opportunity lies. We're getting these different inputs from the various different. How do you do that if everybody's just stuck at home? There is a degree of capability, but boy, does it get better when you lock people in a room and they brainstorm. I have seen that time and time again. Put them in a room for 3 days, and what you get out of that versus put them on the end of a Zoom call for 3 days, it's a night and day output.
Yeah. So, I got a couple of questions on that end. So, and trust me, as somebody who works from their house, and this is the office, and our team all do that. So that's how we're set up. Now, we happen to be, a team of 3. So it's a little bit, I would call it easier in that. But as you look at it from a management standpoint and a leadership standpoint, as you are going through change, there is purposeful intent of communication that clearly has to happen, is what you're talking about in some respects. But is it bringing a level of, is it bringing a level of complication that isn't necessarily needed if you just had people together inside of a space? Or is that just a false question, just because the reality of what's going on now is that maybe, but it doesn't matter because the realities are of what the marketplace is. So you deal with the reality versus reminiscing about how it used to be.
Yeah. Classic answer. It depends.
It depends. Yeah,
however, look at it. I look at it. Yes, there is some incremental complexity to running I'll call it hybrid, because, here at Acre, we've got varying degrees of different roles. We'll actually be in the office for different periods of the time. We're not Amazon. We're not mandating across the board in terms of what happens. But I just think you've got to marry that up against the fact that, the world has changed, as you said, and people do have an expectation. And if you want to limit your hiring pool, your talent pool, then tell them they have to just work in the office. The world's moved on. I measure it by outputs. In the end, that's all you can do, is you measure it by outputs. And outputs do include things like the culture. So how engaged, how much fun do people? It's quite hard to have a lot of fun if you're just doing things on Zoom. If you're
no matter how many games and goofy hats.
Yeah. Yep.
It makes it hard to do that. All right. Well, so I walk out of that section in conversation around purposefulness. Like that to me is like, realities are what they are. Being purposeful with how you do it, and not necessarily bespoking it, but also just not rinse repeating what you were doing before and hoping you get different results. It's like you gotta conform to what's happening.
Yeah.
So we could not have a conversation and not bring up AI. I had some conversations in here around sort of like bold predictions, but I guess I'd just go right to it and say, what are your views on how AI is impacting talent specifically? I'll give you, if I could, I'll give you my thoughts on this just to spark conversation in this direction, or you have you challenge it. It almost feels like it's starting. Remember when you used to have to put on resumes like proficiency in Word, right? And that was like Excel was like, if you didn't have that, it was you were like seen as a
Yeah.
caveman, like in the way you did things. It's almost starting to feel a lot like that. I mean, we talk about it, we romance about the new side of the AI side, but to me, it feels a lot like that. What are your views on how AI, and like, am I crazy in my observations, or I mean, does that? I can tell by your reaction, it must resonate a little bit. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Um, it's so early. It
Yeah,
is so early. And, the rate of change of what's going through. I was lucky enough to be at a conference of one of the larger sort of specialized consultancy organizations that has a huge 5,000 head arm purely dedicated to AI. And so we got to see some of the stuff that is just 6, 9, 12 months ahead of what you see in mainstream. Boy, if we thought change was fast in the last 10 years, we've got some waking up. So it's early, is my point. Is it going to ring in change? Yeah, absolutely, but not necessarily everywhere. And the pace with which it will necessarily be, so I'm going to differentiate here between what AI-enabled processes may make possible and the adoption rate. Because I still think that, in various different industries, there is caution. Take physical security as a great example. There are certain industries where you can leverage AI, and if it's not correct, okay, it's not mission critical, reputational risk, etc., etc. If you make a decision using AI at some point in the future to provide abnormal access, for example, and it's a wrong decision, there are real implications in a physical security world. And so for me, I think that there are elements of AI that are absolutely going to impact physical security sooner rather than later. There are other things that will take time, not because it's not possible, but because the organizations just say, not ready for that right yet.
yeah. No, there's a difference between me using it to create LinkedIn content versus it making sure the right people are into a building and the wrong ones are left out. Yeah, there's definitely a criticality in that. But what I do like about that, though, that you said is we tend to think binarily around these things. Like it is either going to impact or not going to impact. There seems to be camps. A lot of the not going to impact camp is, we've been doing this for a long time. We just called it something different. And you mentioned the big data side. That's like usually where it comes out of, is like, predictable patterning was somewhat of a, anomaly detection existed before quote unquote AI. So they look at that and say it's incremental, just has more marketing on it. But when in a talent standpoint, I do think there's some areas, again, in the non-critical side that you said, quickly will make, like, if I'm an outside salesperson, like, this is a tool that makes me more efficient. It actually is a tool.
Marketing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
remarkable transformations
Yeah.
in certain roles that I think are, it didn't change what you did, but boy, did it make it unbelievably efficient and effective, which frees up more time.
Correct. And
Yeah.
and those are,
And
in the world of, some people have said the past couple of years have been the years of efficiency, and the ability to do more with less. And like that, these are the tools, in my opinion, that are going to go do that.
yep.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we may not
Impact.
look at those as critical, but I do think they add up
Yep.
to something that's somewhat substantial on that side. And
Like,
yeah,
probably
Acre has done that.
less immediate on the physical security world, but if you combine AI with robotics automation, and you think about that side of things, the combination of those two things, I can see that at some point in the future impacting the physical security world. We've seen the DARPA instances of, I can't remember the name of that dog robot and the security intervention, but they to me are a little bit glib, but there are some areas where people will actually say, yeah, that's a different way of doing things.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes too, though. So like I told you, I'm doing a little bit of research on our end of buying habits and pattern changes that are happening, and one of the words that continues to come up is automation. And the follow-up question I would have with them is, are you saying it that it has to happen now, or that there's at least a vision, an agreed upon vision of it getting there? So some of it is like AI's biggest impact is the art of the possible down the road versus the realities of today.
Yep.
And that to me is underappreciated, is sort of it's almost like the artistic side of AI getting gravity into making buying decisions today, because the practicality of it is that I believe I have trust and comfort that this company is going to be relevant 5 years from now, because I believe that AI is going to make an impact.
And imagine that challenge so I'm going to come back and answer your original question. What does that mean for talent hiring? People, inevitably, if you want to be part of the discussion going forwards and shaping the organization in any role that you have, whether it's in marketing or engineering or leadership roles, you've got to be conversant with what's going on. It doesn't mean you necessarily need to be an expert in AI. I think what you do need to do is, as broadly as possible, understand what is coming, and the rate of it coming is the shocking thing here, but what is coming and what might be possible, so that you can engage in that conversation. Because otherwise you're going to be lonely in a meeting room when 5 of you are really into all the anecdotal stuff that you've looked at and starting to say, let's go and do that research, and you're the one saying, I didn't really get around to reading up on that stuff. So there is a minimum level of awareness of what's coming down the pipe that I think you have no choice. If you want to be future leadership talent, you are going to need to adopt that. But the rate of change of what's going to happen in this industry, I think it's the big, really transformational stuff is going to take a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I talk all the time. We call our trends inevitable trends, and then we can argue about the impact and the timing. But what I stopped doing is arguing about the trend side of what's going on, because some of these are just inevitably going to happen. I don't want to argue about them anymore, but it's like, let's talk about, we can argue when and to what impact, because that is the true, I don't know, like people don't know. That's the interesting part.
That's the successful business versus the one that either came to market too early, spent all their money, came to market too early, or the laggards sort of thought, oh dear, everyone's really gone to this now, and they just lost the game. The talent, and you're going to be meeting with Sarah. Sarah's challenge right now, and she's doing a great job, is, what are, of all the use cases of application of AI, which are the ones that we should do and which are the ones that we shouldn't? And it's really good. I admire the ones where we say, that doesn't have a business case today. That's great. You did the analysis, you faced the hard facts, you pumped it. Might be different in a year's time, but that's product management challenge.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right. So I'm mindful of your time, and I know you're busy in doing that. So thank you. I guess I want to leave with one last question, if you don't mind. So what's one thing, as we look at talent and the changes that are happening, that you would say what you should do like right now to better prepare your team for whatever's coming next?
Just make sure that you can articulate that purpose of the company really well in under 3 minutes. Because if everybody in the organization can do that, your ability when you have potential talent sitting in front of you is you can communicate that in a compelling way. And most people, if you want to get them to the next stage in that talent recruit process, you have under 3 minutes before they're either not connecting with this company, or this is a company with a purpose that I buy into, I'll listen to the next piece. And I really think a lot of organizations miss that. And I mean all the way down through the organization. If you can't articulate what it is you do, why you're different, why you're going to win in under 3 minutes, then you haven't done the job of communicating the purpose. And that counts for talent as well in terms of the recruiting process.
I love it because it comes down to communication, the ability to articulate that vision, to crisply get people in the same line moving. Rowing, I guess that's the old adage of the rowing the boat all in the right direction.
It helps.
It does. You think so? It definitely makes it easier to focus on the things you can't control.
Christ, how many times you realize now?
I know. Yeah, a lot of times it comes out. So, well, thank you, Steve. I do appreciate it. This is the first time we've met. There are people within our industry that definitely know you from the video side, but from the access control standpoint, what I hope is that this is the beginning of many conversations, because I do think your insights, your leadership, the fact that you've been through some of this side, your understanding of what talent we need in this sort of forward-looking perspective, which is in a lot of ways we're talking about the today forward-looking, but it's exactly the type of conversation that we want to have with this entire program that we're doing called Access the Future. And I appreciate you taking the time, your candor to have the conversation and sharing a bit about what you think the marketplace needs and where you've been and where we should go. So thank you.
Yeah, Lee, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity as well. And love the questions. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. And the first of many, hopefully. So
yeah.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, go and check out the other ones. We mentioned Kumar. We also talked to Justin. And don't forget, next month, as Steve said, we'll be talking to Sarah, who's their Chief Product Officer, another new voice into the industry. We're going to be talking about why security is becoming a platform, not a product, which is interesting because we talked about 2025, the word of the year is platform. It's playing out in that. So we want to talk about, especially about somebody who's come from an outside perspective with a great background around platforming. So we'll want to hear from you about that. Also, love this conversation. If you like it, it's not a monologue from us. So comment, message me, email, whatever you need to do. But let's go shape that future of access control, because there's no better time to be in our industry than now. So thank you for listening. Thank you again, Steve, for taking the time, and I'll see you soon.